Ambassador Kang stepped off his sleek diplomatic shuttle onto the massive trading station orbiting Proxima 7, his boots clicking against the polished metal floor. The station was a marvel of engineering, a spinning wheel of commerce where thousands of species gathered to trade everything from rare minerals to exotic technologies. Crystal spires jutted from the central hub, their surfaces alive with holographic advertisements in dozens of alien languages. But something was wrong. The usual chaos of interstellar business seemed muted, subdued. Conversations that should have been booming across the vast docking bay instead whispered like secrets. Even the massive cargo mechs moved more quietly than usual, their hydraulic systems barely audible. Kang approached the information desk, where a towering Thraxian clerk processed arrival documents with 4 of his 6 arms. The alien's crystalline exoskeleton reflected the station's neon lights as Kang presented his credentials. Ambassador Kang, Zelani Confederation. I'm here researching pre-war galactic conflicts, specifically regarding the extinct species called humans. The effect was immediate and terrifying. The Thraxian's compound eyes went wide, all 6 arms freezing mid-motion. Around them, conversations stopped entirely. A Vortanian merchant actually dropped his cargo case, exotic spices spilling across, the floor in a rainbow of colors. We don't speak of them loudly here, the clerk whispered, his translator struggling to convey the tremor in his voice. Multiple heads turned their way, beings from across the galaxy suddenly very interested in their conversation. That name carries weight, Ambassador. Heavy weight. The clerk's remaining 2 arms gestured nervously at the crowd that had formed. Perhaps we should speak privately. They moved to a smaller office behind the main desk, passing through corridors lined with viewing ports that showed the endless expanse of space beyond. Other beings watched them go. A group of insectoid Kellery traders, their antennae twitching with obvious anxiety, and several robotic nexus units whose optical sensors tracked their movement with unusual interest. I've been alive for 300 standard years, the Thraxian began once they were alone, his voice barely above a whisper. I remember the time before the Great Silence War. Back then, this station processed 10 times the traffic it does now. The galaxy was different, fuller. Kang leaned forward, his diplomatic training keeping his expression neutral despite his growing curiosity. What happened to the humans? The clerk's exoskeleton actually changed color, shifting from its natural blue to a sickly green. They fought, oh how they fought, but it wasn't just war, Ambassador, it was something else entirely, something that changed how we think about conflict itself. Through the office's transparent walls, Kang could see other beings gathering, not threatening, but watching, waiting. A maintenance droid rolled by, its sensors briefly scanning their conversation, before moving on with mechanical precision. I need to understand, Kang pressed. My government is studying historical conflicts to prevent future wars. If humans were simply defeated. Defeated. The Thraxian's laugh was bitter, echoing strangely through his translator. No, Ambassador. They weren't defeated. They chose something far worse. They chose to make sure no one else could be defeated. The way they were being defeated. The implications hung in the recycled air between them. Through the station's communication systems, Kang could hear the subtle changes in ambient noise, fewer conversations, quieter transactions, as if the entire station was holding its breath. Later, Kang found himself in the station's central plaza, a massive dome where artificial gravity allowed beings to walk on walls and ceilings as easily as floors. Here, representatives from dozens of species conducted business under the light of holographic suns. But even here, the atmosphere felt strained. He approached a group of Asterian traders, their ethereal forms shimmering like living aurora. When he mentioned his research, their leader, an ancient being whose name translated roughly to Star Whisper, actually recoiled. The Silence Makers, Star Whisper breathed, her form flickering with distress. We do not speak their name above whisper level. It attracts attention. Attention from whom? But the Asterians were already dispersing, their forms fading into the crowd like ghosts fleeing daylight. Other beings nearby, a pack of wolf-like Fenrari, several cybernetically enhanced Helios merchants, even a lone Titan-class enforcement robot, all found reasons to be elsewhere. The pattern repeated throughout the station. Every species Kang encountered had the same reaction. Fear, yes, but also something deeper. A reverence that bordered on religious awe. The humans weren't just extinct, they had become something approaching mythology. Finally, Kang made his way to the station's archives, a secured section where Director Wu maintained the historical records. She was human-adjacent in appearance, bipedal, roughly his size, but her silver skin and third eye marked her as Zelani, his own species. "You're asking dangerous questions, Kang," she said without preamble, not even looking up from her holographic displays. The archive stretched away in all directions, data crystals containing the recorded history of 1,000 civilizations. Dangerous how? Director Wu finally faced him, her third eye, the one that could perceive emotional resonance, glowing with concern. Because some knowledge is too dangerous to remember clearly. The humans, what they did in their final moments, it changed the fundamental rules of how wars are fought in this galaxy. She gestured to sealed sections of the archive, areas, blocked by energy barriers and guarded by automated defense systems. Most records from that era are classified at the highest levels, not because they're secret, but because they're too terrible to fully comprehend. Around them, the archive's maintenance systems hummed quietly, but Kang noticed something odd. Even the automated systems seemed to move more carefully when passing certain sealed sections, as if they too had learned to treat some memories with unusual respect. "They didn't just die, did they?" Kang asked quietly. Wu's three eyes met his, and in that moment, he saw something that chilled him more than any battle report could. Pity. Pity for his innocence, for not yet understanding what the whispered name truly meant. "No, Ambassador, they didn't just die. They made sure dying had consequences that would echo through the galaxy for centuries to come. The lower levels of the trading station were a different world entirely. Here, beneath the polished diplomatic surfaces, the real business of the galaxy happened in shadows and whispered deals. Kang descended through maintenance shafts and service corridors, following directions given by a nervous Kalari dock worker who demanded payment just for pointing the way. The air grew thicker as he went deeper, filled with the smell of recycled atmosphere and exotic chemicals. Emergency lighting cast everything in a sickly red glow, and the walls vibrated with the constant hum of the station's massive engines. This was where beings came when they wanted to disappear, where information flowed like illegal substances, and credits changed hands without official records. Kang found the cantina tucked away behind a maze of storage units and forgotten corridors. The establishment had no name, just a flickering holographic symbol that hurt to look at directly. Inside, the lighting was even dimmer, provided by bioluminescent fungi that grew in carefully maintained patches along the walls. The air was thick with smoke from a dozen different worlds, creating a haze that made everything seem dreamlike and dangerous. Beings huddled in booths designed for privacy, their conversations lost in the ambient noise of clinking glasses and humming machinery. A massive Groken bouncer stood by the door, his forearms crossed and his tusks gleaming in the dim light. Automated serving units glided between tables on silent repulsors, their sensors scanning for trouble, while dispensing drinks that could dissolve metal or grant temporary telepathy. Thek sat alone in the darkest corner, exactly as the dock worker had described. The old Vortanian smuggler was ancient even by his species' standards. His once proud crest now faded to a dull grey, his multiple eyes clouded with age and too many memories. His exoskeleton bore the scars of 100 close calls, laser burns, impact craters, and what looked like bite marks from something with very large teeth. "You're the diplomat asking fool questions," Thek wheezed as Kang approached, not bothering, to look up from his drink, something that glowed purple and seemed to move on its own. "Word travels fast down here. Dangerous word." Kang slid into the booth across from him, noting how other patrons suddenly found reasons to move to different tables. Even in this place of shadows and secrets, the topic he sought was too hot to be near. "I need to know about the humans," Kang said directly, placing a credit chip on the table. "Real information, not whispers." Thek's 6 eyes focused on the chip, then on Kang's face, calculating risks and rewards with the practiced ease of someone who'd survived decades in the galaxy's underground. That's not nearly enough for what you're asking, young one. The kind of information you want. It comes with a price that's not measured in credits. Name it. The old smuggler leaned forward, his voice dropping to barely a whisper. Promise me that whatever you learn, you'll use it wisely. The galaxy has forgotten many things for good reasons. Some memories are better left buried. Kang nodded, and Thak pocketed the credit chip with one hand, while producing a small data storage device with another. The device looked ancient, its surface scarred and patched, but Kang could sense the power contained within it. I was there, Thek began, his eyes growing distant. Not by choice, you understand. My ship was caught in the wrong place when the Coalition forces moved on Kepler 442. We thought we'd witness a standard military engagement, overwhelming force crushing a smaller fleet. We'd seen it 1,000 times before. He paused to take a long drink, the liquid leaving phosphorescent traces on his lips. Around them, the cantina's background noise seemed to fade, as if even the ambient machinery was leaning in to listen. The human fleet was pathetic by any military standard. Maybe 200 ships, half of them converted civilian vessels, cargo haulers with missile pods welded to their hulls, passenger liners bristling with improvised weapons. They faced a coalition, armada of over 3,000 warships, the finest military technology from a dozen species. Thek's multiple eyes darted around the cantina, checking for listeners before continuing. But when the shooting started, something was different. The humans didn't fight like they were trying to win. They fought like they were trying to make a point. The data chip contained battle recordings that should have been classified beyond any civilian's reach. Kang plugged it into his personal device, and ghostly holographic images filled the air above their table. Warships the size of small moons exchanged fire with vessels barely larger than atmospheric shuttles. Watch this part, Thek whispered, pointing to a cluster of human ships surrounding a massive coalition dreadnought. See how they're moving? No retreat, no tactical withdrawal. They're ramming speed into the biggest targets they can find. The recording crackled with radio chatter, voices speaking in the human language that had been lost to the galaxy. But the universal translators still worked, and Kang could hear the determination in every word. This is Captain Lee of the Indomitable. A voice cut through the static. All ships, this is humanity's final stand. We die here, but by all the gods of our ancestors, we die taking them with us. What followed was unlike any battle Kang had ever studied. Human ships didn't break formation when damaged. They accelerated toward enemy vessels. Disabled human fighters didn't eject their pilots. They turned themselves into guided missiles. A human cruiser, its entire port side blown away and atmosphere streaming from a dozen breaches, used its remaining engines to drive itself directly into the bridge of a coalition command ship. They were magnificent and terrifying, Thek continued, his voice thick with emotion. I've seen desperate battles before, but this was different. They weren't fighting to survive. They were fighting to teach the galaxy a lesson about the cost of extinction. The battle recordings showed impossible acts of courage and sacrifice. A wing of human fighters, outnumbered 50 to 1, held their formation and charged directly into the heart of the coalition fleet. A damaged human destroyer, its weapons offline and hull breached, rammed itself into a coalition ammunition depot, creating an explosion that destroyed everything within a light minute. But here's what really haunts me, Thek said, fast-forwarding, through the recording. When it was over, when the last human ship was nothing but debris, we found something in the wreckage, data cores, protected by the strongest encryption we'd ever seen. The humans had been recording everything. Every battle, every defeat, every lesson learned in blood. The old smuggler's eyes met Kang's, and in them, the diplomat saw something that chilled him. Fear, yes, but also a kind of respect that bordered on worship. Those data cores disappeared into coalition intelligence, but rumors spread. The humans hadn't just been fighting a war, they'd been studying their enemies, learning everything they could about coalition tactics, technology, weaknesses. Even as they died, they were planning something. As if summoned by their conversation, alerts began flashing on Kang's personal communicator, emergency signals from the station's sensor arrays, detecting something at the very edge of scanner. Range. Energy signatures, unlike anything in the current galactic database, but with quantum resonance patterns that matched theoretical projections of advanced human technology. Other beings in the cantina were receiving similar alerts, their various communication devices lighting up with urgent messages. The automated serving units froze in place, their sensors focused on external threats. Even the massive Groken bouncer looked nervous, all four of his hands moving to the weapons at his belt. "Impossible," Thek whispered, staring at his own scanner. Readings. "Those signatures, they match pre-war human propulsion systems, but the power levels are off the charts. Whatever's out there, it's been improved far beyond anything the humans had during the war." Through the cantina's single viewport, a small window that looked out into space, Kang could see other ships beginning to move. Trade vessels powering up their engines, military patrols adjusting their formations, and in the distance the unmistakable energy blooms of ships dropping out of hyperspace. The galaxy's edge, where nothing had stirred for centuries, was suddenly very much alive. The Confederacy's archives were a fortress of information, buried deep within their capital world of Nexus Prime. Getting inside required every diplomatic trick Kang had learned in his century of service, plus a few favors from contacts who preferred not to be named. The facility stretched for kilometers underground, protected by energy shields that could deflect asteroid impacts, and guarded by automated defense systems that had never failed in their 300-year history. Kang's credentials got him through the outer checkpoints, but the deeper archives required special clearance. He used his research authorization, claiming to study pre-war defensive strategies for the Zalani military. The AI security systems scanned his biometrics, cross-referenced his diplomatic status, and finally granted him access to Level 7, classified materials from the Great Silence War. The archive chamber was vast and cold, filled with data crystals that hummed with stored information. Holographic displays showed the organizational structure of millions of files, each one protected by quantum encryption. Automated librarian units glided between the storage arrays on silent repulsors, their optical sensors constantly monitoring for unauthorized access. But Kang wasn't looking for the sanitized official records. He needed the raw data, the unfiltered reports from the final days of the war. Using access codes provided by Director Wu, he bypassed the standard search protocols and dove into the deepest classified sections. What he found there would haunt him for the rest of his life. The Coalition's final assault on Earth had been planned as a demonstration of power. Over 4,000 warships from 12 different species had assembled in the Sol system, their combined firepower capable of cracking planets. The humans had perhaps 200 ships left, most of them damaged civilian vessels pressed into military service. Their home planet was already scarred from orbital bombardment, entire continents blackened by kinetic strikes. The tactical assessment was clear. Humanity had perhaps hours before complete extinction. The Coalition commanders expected surrender, or at worst a final desperate charge that would be easily crushed. They had prepared for every conventional military response. They had not prepared for what Admiral Park had planned. The first sign something was wrong came from the Coalition's sensor arrays. Energy readings from Earth's surface were spiking beyond anything in their databases. The planet's magnetic field was fluctuating wildly, creating aurora displays that could be seen from space. Deep scanning revealed massive construction projects in Earth's core, machinery that seemed to violate several fundamental laws of physics. "What are they doing down there?" Admiral Vex of the Thraxian fleet had asked during the final tactical briefing. The recording showed a conference room filled with the Coalition's finest military minds, beings who had conquered half the galaxy, working together to solve humanity's final puzzle. "Unknown," replied the Coalition's chief science officer, a cybernetically enhanced Helios whose calculations had never been wrong. The energy patterns suggest they're manipulating gravitational fields on a planetary scale, but the power requirements would be impossible with their current technology. The answer came from an unexpected source, a human defector who had joined the Coalition years earlier. Dr. Kim, a former Earth physicist who had been captured during the war's early stages, studied the energy readings with growing horror. "They're not trying to defend the planet," Kim whispered, his face pale with realization. "They're turning it into a weapon." The recordings showed the Coalition's growing confusion as more data came in. Human ships weren't taking defensive positions around Earth. They were moving away from it, forming a perimeter at the very edge of the solar system. The few remaining human communications were encrypted beyond the Coalition's ability to decode, but the pattern was clear. Humanity was preparing something unprecedented. Admiral Park's face appeared on the main screen, transmitted from the surface of Earth. She looked tired, older than her years, but her eyes burned with a determination that transcended mere military duty. Behind her, through the viewports of what appeared to be a massive underground facility, the Coalition fleet could see the scarred surface of humanity's homeworld. "Coalition forces," Park began, her voice carrying across the void with crystal. "Da clarity. You have pursued us across the galaxy. You have destroyed our colonies, murdered our families, and hunted us to the edge of extinction. You came here expecting to finish what you started." The transmission quality was perfect, enhanced by quantum communication arrays that must have cost Earth its last energy reserves. Every word was heard clearly by the thousands of beings in the Coalition fleet, from the lowest maintenance drone to the highest command officers. "You want to exterminate us?" Park continued, and something in her tone made seasoned warriors shift uncomfortably in their command chairs. "Fine, but you'll never do this to anyone else ever again." The first gravitational wave hit the Coalition fleet like an invisible tsunami. Ships weighing millions of tons were suddenly pulled toward Earth with irresistible force. Emergency thrusters fired automatically, but the gravity field was too strong, too precisely focused. The Coalition's most massive dreadnoughts, vessels, that had never been moved by anything less than their own engines, began accelerating toward the planet, whether their crews wanted to or not. "Impossible!" Admiral Vex screamed, his multiple arms working frantically at his control console. "Nothing can generate this kind of gravitational field." But the humans had found a way. Deep in Earth's core, they had built something that turned the planet itself into a massive gravity weapon. The energy requirements were astronomical, drawing power from the planet's rotation, its magnetic field, even its orbital motion around the sun. Earth was literally consuming itself to create this final trap. The Coalition forces tried to escape, their engines straining against the artificial gravity well. Some of the smaller, faster ships managed to break free, but the main battle fleet was caught like insects in amber. And still the gravitational field grew stronger. "Retreat," Admiral Vex ordered, but his communications were already being disrupted by the space-time distortions. "All ships, full reverse thrust. Emergency jump to hyperspace." But hyperspace was impossible inside the gravity field. The distorted space-time made faster-than-light travel deadly, trapping the Coalition fleet in normal space where physics itself had become a weapon. Ships that tried to jump to hyperspace simply vanished, torn apart by forces they couldn't comprehend. The final recording came from Park herself, transmitted in the last moments before the gravitational weapon reached critical mass. She stood in what appeared to be the weapon's control center, surrounded by displays showing the Coalition fleet being pulled inexorably toward Earth. "You taught us that extinction was acceptable," she said, her voice eerily calm. "You showed us that entire species could be wiped out for political convenience, but you made one mistake. You assumed we would die quietly." Around her, human technicians worked frantically at their controls, their faces grim with determination. These were the last humans in the universe, and they were spending their final moments ensuring that their death would have meaning. "The gravity weapon will reach critical mass in 17 minutes, Park continued. "The resulting implosion will create a space-time distortion that will destroy everything within 12 light years. Your fleet, our planet, this entire system, all of it will be compressed into a single point of infinite density." The Coalition commanders were screaming orders, trying everything they could to escape, but the trap was perfect. The gravity field had been designed by the finest human physicists, working for years to create this moment. There was no escape, no last-minute reprieve. "But here's what will really terrify you," Park said, her image beginning to distort as the gravity field affected even light itself. "The explosion will leave a permanent scar in space-time. A dead zone where faster-than-light travel is impossible, where the laws of physics themselves are broken, and every species in the galaxy will know what happened here. The transmission, ended with a flash of light that temporarily blinded every sensor in the Coalition fleet. When the sensors cleared, Earth was gone. The Sun was gone. The entire solar system had been replaced by a sphere of twisted space-time that hurt to look at directly. The Coalition fleet, what remained of it, was scattered across local space, their ships battered by gravitational waves that had passed through them like tsunamis. Of the 4,000 ships that had entered the Sol system, fewer than 300 survived, and most of those were damaged beyond repair. The dead zone, as it came to be known, remained exactly as Park had predicted. A 12-light-year sphere where space itself was broken, where ships that entered never returned. The distortion was visible from neighboring star systems, a constant reminder of what humanity had done in their final moments, and in the deepest. Archives locked away where only the highest-ranking officials could access them were the final calculations showing exactly how much energy the humans had released. The explosion had been controlled, focused, designed to create maximum destruction within a specific area while leaving the rest of the galaxy intact. It was a weapon of perfect vengeance, powerful enough to destroy humanity's enemies, precise, enough to spare the innocent, and permanent enough to ensure the galaxy would never forget what happened when a species was pushed to extinction. Kang stared at the data, his three eyes struggling to process the magnitude of what he was seeing. The humans hadn't just died. They had rewritten the fundamental laws of warfare, proving that extinction was a weapon that could cut both ways. The trading station's emergency klaxons screamed across every level as the energy signatures resolved into something that defied everything the galaxy thought it knew about human extinction. Through the massive viewing ports of the station's observation deck, beings from dozens of species watched in stunned silence as shapes emerged from the darkness between stars. They weren't like any ships in the galactic databases. These vessels moved with predatory grace, their hulls absorbing light rather than reflecting it. Where modern ships were built for efficiency and comfort, these craft radiated pure menace. They were sleek as hunting beasts, black as the void they'd emerged from, and covered in markings that made seasoned warriors step back from the viewports. The ships moved in perfect formation, their approach calculated to inspire maximum psychological impact. They didn't rush forward like raiders or maintain diplomatic distance like peaceful visitors. Instead, they advanced with the patient confidence of apex predators who knew their prey had nowhere to run. Station Commander Nek, a veteran Grokan, who'd seen 3 wars and countless first contacts, stared at his sensor readings, with all 4 of his hands trembling. Those energy signatures, they're definitely human in origin, but the power output is impossible. These ships are generating more energy than our entire station. The fleet consisted of 12 vessels, each one unique in design but sharing the same predatory aesthetics. The largest was easily the size of a Coalition dreadnought, its hull bristling with weapons that seemed to bend light around them. Smaller, ships flanked it like escort fighters, but even these were larger and more heavily armed than most species' main battle cruisers. Throughout the station, beings were abandoning their business and rushing to viewports or sensor displays. The Thraxian information clerk who'd first spoken to Kang about humans was now surrounded by a crowd of his colleagues, all of them staring at readouts that confirmed their worst fears. The humans had not only survived, they had evolved. All stations, all frequencies came a transmission that cut through every communication channel simultaneously. The voice was human, speaking in perfect galactic standard, but there was something different about it. Where the old human transmissions Kang had heard carried desperation and defiance, this voice held cold certainty. This is Captain Min of the Void Fleet vessel, Retribution. We've heard the whispers about our homeworld. We've come to reclaim our place in this galaxy. The image that appeared on every screen throughout the station showed a woman who was unmistakably human, but changed. Her skin was pale from generations in space. Her eyes adapted to low-light conditions, with pupils that seemed almost too large. She wore a uniform of dark material that seemed to absorb light, and behind her, the bridge of her ship was a study in efficient menace. "We know you speak our name in hushed tones," Captain Min continued, her voice carrying to every corner of the station. "We know you've turned our sacrifice into legend, but legends as you're about to learn, sometimes return from the dead. The Chatis. Psychological impact was immediate and devastating. Beings who had spent centuries whispering about the extinct humans were now faced with their living descendants. But these weren't the desperate defenders who had died at Earth. These were something new, something that had been forged in the emptiness between stars. Kang found himself in the station's main communication center, surrounded by diplomatic staff and military advisors who were struggling to process what they were seeing. The humans had scattered colonies before the war, but everyone assumed they'd been found and destroyed. Instead, it seemed they'd been hiding, growing, preparing. "Look at their ship configurations," whispered Commander Neck, pointing to tactical displays. "Those aren't just weapons, they're technologies we don't recognize. Whatever they've been doing out there in the dark, they've been advancing." The human ships had arranged themselves in a perfect sphere around the trading station, not threatening but making it clear that escape was impossible. Each vessel maintained exact spacing, their movements synchronized with mechanical precision. It was a display of technological superiority that sent chills through every military mind watching. More transmissions followed, brief communications, between the human ships that used encryption methods far beyond anything in current galactic databases. The few fragments that universal translators could pass mentioned things like deep void protocols and long night contingencies, terms that suggested the humans had been planning this moment for generations. Kang activated his diplomatic credentials and requested permission to open formal communications. The response came not from Captain Min, but from an automated system that scanned his biometrics, analyzed his diplomatic history, and apparently found him acceptable for contact. "Ambassador Kang of the Zelani Confederation," Min's voice filled his private communication booth. "Your species was not among those who participated in our extinction. You may speak." "Captain Min," Kang began carefully, "I've been researching your people's history. I understand the pain of what happened to your homeworld." "Pain?" Min's laugh was cold and sharp. "Ambassador, you understand nothing. Pain is what we felt in the first generation after Earth's sacrifice. What we feel now is purpose." The view screen showed more detail of the human vessel's bridge. The crew moved with practiced efficiency, their movements economical and precise. These people had been born in space, raised in the void between stars, and it showed in every gesture. They were adapted to their environment in ways that went beyond mere training. "We've spent 3 centuries in the deep void," Min continued. 3 centuries listening to the galaxy's whispers, learning how our sacrifice was remembered. You made us into monsters in your stories, beings too savage to speak of loudly. We decided to become worthy of your fear. Through the station's sensor arrays, Kang could see more details of the human ships. Their hulls weren't just black. They seemed to actively absorb sensor scans, making detailed analysis impossible. The weapons ports were sealed behind retractable armor, giving no hint of their true capabilities. Even their engine signatures were muffled, producing thrust through methods the station's computers couldn't identify. "I could serve as a mediator," Kang offered, knowing that his diplomatic training was probably inadequate for this situation. "Help establish peaceful relations between your people and the current galactic community." Min's image leaned forward, her adapted eyes seeming to look directly into his soul. "Mediator? Ambassador, you still don't understand. We're not here to negotiate. We're here to ensure that what happened to us never happens to anyone else." Behind her, other crew members worked at stations that seemed to blend advanced technology with ritual precision. Everything about their ship spoke of a culture that had been refined in isolation, shaped by singular purpose across multiple generations. "The galaxy has had 3 centuries to learn from our example," Min said. 3 centuries to prove that the lesson of Earth's sacrifice was understood. Instead, we've watched from the void as wars continued, as genocide remained a tool of policy, as species after species faced extinction without anyone caring enough to intervene. The human fleet began to move, not toward the station but into a more complex formation that demonstrated their tactical sophistication. Each ship moved independently, yet remained perfectly coordinated, like dancers performing a deadly ballet. It was clear they'd been training for this moment their entire lives. "You whisper our name in fear," Min said, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper, but carrying perfect clarity through the communication systems. "You've made us into cautionary tales, warnings about the price of pushing a species too far. But whispers and fear aren't enough." The largest human vessel powered up additional systems, its energy output climbing to levels that made the station's defensive systems automatically activate. Not threatening, but demonstrating capabilities that dwarfed anything the current galaxy possessed. "Soon," Captain Min concluded, her image flickering as the transmission prepared to end, "you'll say our name with respect. And when other species face extinction, when genocide threatens the innocent, you'll remember that the void has eyes, and the dead have returned to keep their promise." The communication ended, leaving Kang staring at a blank screen while around him. The galaxy's representatives tried to comprehend what humanity had become in the darkness between stars. They were no longer the desperate defenders who had died at Earth. They were something new, something that had been forged by loss and tempered by isolation into the galaxy's conscience made manifest. And they had come home. The neutral diplomatic station hanging in the void between star systems had never hosted a gathering like this. Built specifically for interspecies negotiations, the massive structure rotated slowly in space, its crystal spires and metallic rings designed to accommodate every known form of sentient life. Today, representatives from over 50 species had gathered, their ships forming a careful perimeter around the station while maintaining respectful distances from each other. But all eyes were on the 12 black vessels that had taken position at the meeting's heart. The human void fleet maintained their predatory formation, their ships seeming to drink in the light from nearby stars. No one had seen technology like theirs, and the energy readings they produced made even the most advanced galactic civilizations feel primitive. Inside the station's great assembly hall, a massive chamber with artificial gravity that could be adjusted for any species, beings who had never agreed on anything found themselves united in nervous anticipation. The hall itself was a marvel of engineering, with floating platforms that could accommodate everything from the massive Grokan delegates to the ethereal Asterians who existed more as energy than matter. Admiral Yun entered with a delegation of 12 humans, and the effect was immediate. These weren't the pale, adapted void dwellers that Captain Min had shown them. These humans looked more like the historical records, but there was something different about them, an aura of quiet confidence that made seasoned warriors step back. Without thinking, Yun herself was impressive without being intimidating. She wore a simple uniform of dark blue material that seemed to shift and flow like liquid shadow. Her hair was silver despite her apparent youth, and her eyes held depths that spoke of someone who had seen the birth and death of stars. Behind her, the other human delegates moved with the same economical grace, their presence filling the hall despite their small numbers. "Honored representatives," Yun began, her voice carrying clearly through the hall's acoustic systems. She spoke in perfect galactic standard, but her accent carried hints of something older, something that had been preserved in the void between stars. "We return to you after 3 centuries of silence." The various delegates shifted uncomfortably. A group of Thraxian ambassadors huddled together, their crystalline shells clicking nervously. The robotic Nexus representatives maintained their usual stoic posture, but their optical sensors focused intently on the human delegation. Even the massive Grokan war chiefs, beings who feared nothing in conventional combat, seemed unsettled by the humans' presence. "You exterminated us once," Yun continued, her voice never rising above conversational levels, but somehow carrying the weight of entire civilizations. "Hunted us across the galaxy, destroyed our colonies, murdered our families. You reduced us from billions to the last desperate million hiding on our homeworld." She gestured, and holographic displays materialized throughout the hall, showing images from the war that most species had tried to forget. The systematic destruction of human colonies, the pursuit of civilian ships, the final siege of Earth. The Coalition's own records, displayed with perfect clarity for all to see. "You made our name a whisper of fear," Yun said, walking slowly through the center of the hall as the images continued to play. "Taught your children that we were the species too savage to speak of loudly. created legends about the madness that drove us to our final act. The holographic displays shifted, showing the aftermath of Earth's destruction, the dead zone with its twisted space-time, the scattered remains of the Coalition fleet, the gravitational scars that still marked local space centuries later. Some delegates actually flinched at the images, remembering the terror those first reports had caused. But we learned from our sacrifice, Yun continued, her tone shifting subtly. In the void between stars, the survivors of our scattered colonies had time to think, to plan, to understand what our sacrifice truly meant. New holographic displays appeared, showing technology that made the assembled delegates gasp in recognition and fear. Defense systems that could protect entire star systems, weapons that could neutralize aggression without destroying the aggressor, shields that could make genocide physically impossible. We offer this freely to all species, Yun announced, her words echoing through the vast chamber. Weapons that make aggression impossible, shields that protect the innocent, defensive systems that ensure no species will ever again face what we faced. The reaction was immediate and chaotic. Delegates began talking excitedly among themselves, their various languages creating a cacophony of sound that the universal translators struggled to process. The implications were staggering. Technology that could end warfare as they knew it, freely given by the very species the galaxy had driven to extinction. Ambassador Kang found himself standing, his diplomatic training struggling to process what he was hearing. "Admiral," he called out, his voice cutting through the noise. "What do you want in return?" Yun's smile was sad but genuine. "Nothing, Ambassador Kang. We want nothing because we have already received everything we could desire. The knowledge that our sacrifice had meaning." She gestured again, and the holographic displays showed the current state of the galaxy. Wars that had ended not through victory, but through exhaustion. Species that had stepped back from extinction not through mercy, but through fear of creating another dead zone. "You whisper our name, because you fear what we became in our final moments," Yun said, her voice carrying a note of something that might have been forgiveness. "But we chose to become something better. We spent 3 centuries in the void, learning to transform rage into purpose, vengeance into protection." A Vortanian delegate, his multiple eyes focused intently on the human admiral, stood up slowly. "And if we refuse your gift, if we choose to continue as we have?" Yun's expression didn't change, but something in her presence shifted, becoming more focused, more dangerous. "Then you will face what you have always faced, the consequences of your choices. But now you will face them knowing that there are those watching from the void, ready to ensure that extinction never again becomes a tool of convenience." The human delegation began distributing data crystals containing the technical specifications for their defensive technologies. Each crystal was identical, containing enough information to revolutionize galactic civilization. The humans moved through the hall with quiet efficiency, offering their gift to every delegation regardless of their species' role in the ancient war. "The choice is yours," Yun announced, as her people completed their task. "Accept our gift and join us in ensuring that genocide becomes impossible, or continue as you have, knowing that the void has long memory and that the dead keep their promises." They say. Debate that followed lasted for hours, delegates arguing in dozens of languages about the implications of accepting technology from the returning humans. Some feared it was a trap, others worried about the changes it would bring to galactic politics. But slowly, inevitably, the reality sank in. The humans were offering genuine protection against the very fate they had suffered. Ambassador Kang watched as delegation after delegation began activating the data crystals, their technical experts already working to understand the revolutionary technologies contained within. The Thraxians were first, their natural curiosity overcoming their fear. The robotic nexus units began immediate analysis, their logical processes recognizing the defensive value of the human systems. Even the proud Grokan war chiefs, after heated debate among themselves, finally accepted the crystals. They understood better than most what it meant when a warrior species offered protection instead of demanding vengeance. As the meeting drew to a close, Yun stood once more in the center of the great hall. "Today the whispers change," she said quietly. Our name will still be spoken in hushed tones, but no longer in fear. Instead, you will whisper it in reverence, for those who chose to transform their greatest tragedy into the galaxy's salvation. The human delegation departed as quietly as they had arrived, leaving behind a galaxy forever changed. Their ships moved back into the void with the same predatory grace, but now their purpose was clear. They were not conquerors returning for vengeance, but guardians ensuring that their sacrifice would never be meaningless. Ambassador Kang remained in the observation deck long after the other delegates had departed, watching the human fleet disappear into the darkness between stars. Around him, the galaxy was already beginning to change as species activated the human technologies, beginning the long process of building a universe where extinction was no longer possible. The whispers would indeed change, he realized. Humanity's name would still be spoken quietly, but now with the respect due to those who had turned their darkest hour into the galaxy's brightest hope. They had died as victims but returned as saviors, proving that even in the void between stars, redemption was possible. And in the endless darkness of space, 12 black ships continued their eternal patrol, watching over a galaxy that would never again forget the true cost of driving a species to extinction. The end.